All right, so let's jump into our advanced topics. And we're going to talk about really a couple of different things here. We're going to talk about dynamic apex and pattern and matter classes. At least within this section, we're not going to talk about visual force controllers because the next portion of our class is to get into great detail on visual force controllers. So let's talk about dynamic apex. Well, dynamic apex is, it consists of a few different things. There's something called Schema Describe, and what this is it's a way to inquire or to programmatically learn about the metadata about your data model within Apex. There's something called dynamic socle and dynamic socle, and what these do is allow you to create socle and socle queries dynamically by generating strings that ultimately are the queries. And then there's dynamic DML, and we'll take a look at dynamic DML, but that allows us to operate on our data. All right. So what is Schema Describe? Well, Schema Describe is the mechanism by which we can programmatically inquire about our data model. So what does that mean? Well, one of the things that we could do is we could access whatever the label is associated with a specific field. We could access what are the list of available pick list options or pick list items associated with a field of type pick list. So there's a number of things that we can do using this. Another use case could be maybe we want to construct something like the tree structure that we have within our schema browser. In that case, it's essentially going out and saying, all right, give me a list of all of the objects, and then associated with each object, give me a list of all of the fields associated with that object. In that case, the person who built that that tool, associated with a graphical widget in order to display and allow the user to interact with that. So there's a number of things that we can do with this. All right, so let's take a look at how we would use this programmatically. Well, first of all, there's a call that we can make that will return what's called a global describe, which is kind of, you can think of it as the root of all of our objects. What it does is it returns a map that we can utilize to then access either all or any of the objects within our organization. And then we can drill down and for a specific object access the fields. But the starting point, if we were going to build that tree widget on our own, would be to call this method, which is schema.globalDescribe. And like I said, this is going to return that map, which is going to allow us to access all the objects. There's a couple of things that we are going to utilize in the Schema Describe set of method calls. One are tokens, and a token is a sort of an identifier for a specific object or for a specific field. The token can be utilized to obtain something called the describe result. Now, the describe result is the thing which contains all the metadata associated with whatever it is that we want to look at. So if we're talking about an object, there is a describe sObject, for that matter a describe field result. But like I said, the describe result is the class from which we can then inquire about the metadata associated with whatever it is. There are many different types of describe results. There's a describe sObject result, describe field result. There's also a describe child relationship for related lists, and then describe record type info and pick list entry for our pick lists. So one of the things you might do in terms of how you might execute code that's using Schema Describe is you generate a list or a map of the tokens. identify which S objects that you want to access, and then get the describe result. So from, for instance, an S object, you could obtain the token. With the token, you could then obtain the describe result, and then you could inquire about metadata associated with that particular object, like, for instance, let's say the label or something along those lines. So here's some code, and what we do is we start from the top, which is we start with the global describe. And like I said, this returns a map. And what we're doing here is we're mapping the string representation, so that the name of each S object as a string, and then the token associated with that. So for instance, for account, the key within this map would be simply the string account. And when we looked up the value, that would then return the associated token. So what we might do is, here it says string object name equals account. One of the things we might do is, maybe this was passed to us as a part of a method, or a user selected this, or maybe we're just iterating through every single one of them. But now we know that we want to operate on the account. We could then do a lookup in that map for the account token. And then using that token, we can call the getDescribe method, which returns our describe result associated with that object. Like I said, at that level, we can now access metadata associated with that object. Now, one of the things that we might want to do now that we're at the S object level is to access a map of all of the fields and obtain information about the fields. So in this case, what we might have done is that, once again, a user might have selected, or somehow there was an input where we're going to get more information about the industry field. Then what we can do is we can look up the token associated with that particular field, and then using our describe result previously, and then we can then get the field describe result. And from there, maybe this is in this case, this field is of type pick list. And so maybe we want to obtain or print out a list of all of the available pick list items. So anytime normally, as opposed to accessing our metadata, we only see what the currently set option is. We don't see what all the available options are. Well, here we can obtain that list of available options. To further expand on this example, we might have done something, for instance, in a visual force controller in which we're rendering maybe a list of radio buttons. We don't want to hard code into our visual force controller what we think that list of pick list items might be, because down the road somebody might go into the definition of the custom object, edit that field, and then add or remove a specific pick list item. In that case, now our object definition, our data model, would be out of sync with our controller. By using this technique, we're able to obtain the latest list of pick list items when generating that list. All right, dynamic sockle. What dynamic sockle refers to is we can execute sockle queries by passing a database query method, a string, which represents the sockle query. This is kind of similar to things you might have done with JDBC programming. One side note to this is that when you're creating this string, especially if it's something that a user is entering in when generating it, there's something called SQL injection, which we've renamed sockle injection. So you don't want to allow users to actually insert some sockle like or equals, or 1 equals 1, or something like that, so that the sockle query that you perform always returns true, or something like that. So that's just a security thing, and same thing goes for Sossle. So Sossle, we can perform our free text searches, and what we can do here is once again build up the Sossle query. Sossle, by the way, is a little bit different as opposed to selecting. We find, so it has a different syntax, but it's similar. It does free text searches, but once again, we can create a string which represents the query that we would like to execute. Okay. All right, and then there's the topic of dynamic DML. And what we're talking about with dynamic DML is it really kind of refers to a few things. Here, this is showing kind of a related topic, which is what this is really referring to is the fact that if we have a instance of an S object, we can obtain from this the token associated with that S object type by calling this get S object type method associated with all S objects. Once we have the token, we could then, for instance, instantiate a new object of whatever that type is. Okay, so we would need to set it equal to the generic class or the class S object. We would need to cast it to actually do sort of account things with it. In addition, what also isn't kind of being shown here, you can also do things like place a or set a field value on an S object. There is a get and a put method where the get would take a string. So if you had an S object, you could get a specific field's value by passing it the name of the field that you would like to access. So if you think about how this might work in conjunction with your Schema Describe, one of the things you might determine is what that specific S object is, or the field, and then be able to dynamically put into that field a value associated with whatever that field is. And then to sort of wrap this up, what really makes dynamic DML DML oriented is that when you finally perform that insert or the update or the delete, you don't need to know the underlying type for whatever it is that you are inserting, updating, or deleting. So for instance, you can create instantiate an object, and let's say that we have a method, and the parameter for the method is a single S object, and so we have S object S. And let's say sometimes we pass it a contact, other times we pass it an account, but S is equal to some underlying concrete S object type. We could then perform an insert on S without really caring or knowing what S really is. Okay, so that is not necessary when performing that insert, update, or delete. Okay. I'd like to talk about our pattern and matcher classes. In Apex, there are pattern and matcher classes, and what these are very much modeled on the Java equivalents, and they allow you to perform things like regular expressions. So if you're passed a block of text or a string, you can look for something. You can also do things like transformation or remove specific characters or do something along those lines. What we do is we instantiate a pattern object which represents whatever it is that we are attempting to match on with our regular expression. We would then instantiate a matcher object, and we associate it with the pattern. We would check to see if it, for instance, matches something or something else that we wanted to do using our regular expression. So let's take a look at some sample code. So here we have our pattern object, which we passed our regular expression to it. In our case, it's simply A star B, so anything that starts with A. And I think actually in Java regular expressions, the stars just represents a single character. So this would be correct. Am I correct? It's dot is a single character. Star is any number. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. Any number of anything. Okay. So yeah.
Is the star any number of preceding character? Or?
Right. Any number of preceding character. Yeah.
Expression,
yeah. So what we're okay. Let me set that foundation.
A anything C. It's A dot star C. I think.
Yeah. So a dot star. So yeah. So a dot is a one character. Any number. Yeah, okay. So 0 or more.
Remember the one before, so that's one or more A's and B's.
Ah, there we go. Okay. Regular expressions. I love them. So I'm sorry. Any number of A's. Okay, you know what? I should have just looked at the second line here where we're attempting to match it. So here we have ob. So yeah, very good. So this is any number of A's and then a B. That's what we're looking for with this regular expression. So we're creating our pattern, and then associated with the pattern there is a matcher method that will then compare whatever it is that is our input, typically that would be passed to this, to the regular expression that we created as a part of the pattern. Okay, and then we can check to see if that matched. All right. So that is available, and then getting back to the fact, well, what syntax is this? If you want to, basically behind the scenes, it's using Java. So if you want the exact regular expression syntax, use the Java regular expression syntax for creating the actual regular expressions. Okay.
For more information on Salesforce.com training and certification, please visit www.salesforce.com/training.